So this is Purushottam Adhika Mas. Does anyone know the significance of Purushottam Adhika Mas? Not the temple. Anyway. Vishal, you know the significance. It started, I believe, on the 8th of July or so. We'll carry on for 30 days. And whatever spiritual activities, spiritual consciousness, spiritual meditation one performs during this month, one gets 1,000 times the benefit. If you say Hare Krishna, say Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. So you just said 1,000 Hare Krishna. So say as many as you can. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. So, and there's another month that comes up in October, November called Kartik. And in Kartik month you also get 1,000 times the benefit. But, what's the big but? The but is that whatever unspiritual activities one may perform, one gets the results of that as well. So Kartik one has to be very careful. Also, taking care to perform spiritual activities, but avoiding especially any other actions. But for Purushottam Adhika Mas, no bad results. Just whatever good you do, you get it. So it's a special time, only comes every 3 years. It's an extra month. In the Vedic calendar, every 3 years, there's an extra month, and that's the Adhika Mas. So we're in the middle of it. Maybe you weren't aware, but now that you are, try to perform as many spiritual activities as possible, and Krishna will reciprocate very nicely. Hare Krishna. We'll sing our normal song, Srila Prabhupada. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Upijana Balava Girivara Hari Upijana Balava Girivara Hari Yashodhanana Bhajanam Jana Yashodhanana Bhajanam Jana Janaki Radhana Jaya Jaya Radha Madhava Punjabi Hare Jaya Radha Madhava Punjabi Hare Gopi Jana Balava Devara Gopi Jana Balava Devara Yashodhanana Vrajatanavantanna Yashodhanana Vrajatanavantanna Yamana Jira Panna Hare Yamana Jira Panna Hare Radha Madhava Punjabi Hare Jaya Radha Madhava Punjabi Hare Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Shri Krishna Chaitanya Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shri Vasani Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Right. So, this month is called Purushottama Adhikamas. So, Purusha means the Supreme Person, or it means a person, a Purusha. There's Purusha and there's Prakriti. Purusha means the enjoyer, and Prakriti means the enjoyed. So, Uttama means the highest, the supreme. So, Purushottama Adhika means the mas, or the month of Purushottama, the Supreme Person. So, in the Bhagavad Gita, there is a chapter dedicated to Purushottama Yoga. We don't have any Mongol Arti sweets, but does anyone know who's not a regular Hare Krishna? Purushottama Yoga, which chapter? Chapter 15. Chapter 15 is called the Yoga of the Supreme Person. So for Purusham Adhika Mas, what is actually recommended, suggested, you can read the 15th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita every day. That's something you can do to honor, respect, glorify this month, and get great spiritual benefit. So we're going to do that. We're just going to read through the translations, and we'll all get the spiritual benefit of hearing the Yoga of the Supreme Person. Hare Krishna. And it's a very interesting chapter. The first verse is my Ramdev. This is Ramdev's favorite verse. The Blessed Lord said, there is a banyan tree. Sorry, we should start. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Text 1. The Blessed Lord said, there is a banyan tree which has its roots upward, roots are up, and its branches down, and whose leaves are the Vedic hymns. One who knows this tree is the knower of the Vedas. Text 2. The branches of this tree extend downward and upward, nourished by the three modes of material nature. The twigs are the objects of the senses. The tree also has roots going down, and these are bound to the fruitive actions of human society. Translation: the real form of this tree cannot be perceived in this world. No one can understand where it ends, where it begins, or where its foundation is. But with determination, one must cut down this tree with the weapon of detachment. So doing, one must seek that place from which having once gone, one never returns, and their surrender to that Supreme Personality of Godhead, from whom everything has begun, and in whom everything is abiding since time immemorial. Text 4, text 5. One who is free from illusion, false prestige, and false association, who understands the eternal, who is done with material lust, and is freed from the duality of happiness and distress, and who knows how to surrender unto the Supreme Person, attains to that eternal kingdom. Text 6. That abode of mine is not illumined by the sun or moon, nor by electricity. Oh, that's good news. One who reaches it never returns to this material world. The living entities in this conditioned world are my eternal fragmental parts. Due to conditioned life, they are struggling very hard with the six senses, which include the mind. The living entities in the material world carries his different conceptions of life from one body to another, as the air carries aromas. The living entity taking another gross body obtains a certain type of ear, tongue, and nose and sense of touch, which are grouped about the mind. He thus enjoys a particular set of sense objects. The foolish cannot understand how a living entity can quit his body, nor can they understand what sort of body he enjoys under the spell of the modes of nature. But one whose eyes are trained in knowledge can see all this. So this is one of the particular phrases that devotees use that generally confuse materialistic persons. Quit the body, quitting the body, that you give it up. Who would want to give up their body? But a person who's a devotee understands that it has to go at a certain time, and one is ready. This will be explained in the 8th chapter, or as was explained in the 8th chapter, that one who can remember Krishna at the time of giving up this body, they can go back home, back to the spiritual world. The foolish cannot understand how a living entity can quit his body, nor can they understand what sort of body he enjoys under the spell of the modes of nature. But one whose eyes are trained in knowledge can see all this. The endeavoring transcendentalist who is situated in self-realization can see all this clearly, but those who are not situated in self-realization cannot see what is taking place, though they may try to. Translation: the splendor of the sun, which dissipates the darkness of this whole world, comes from me, and the splendor of the moon and the splendor of fire are also from me. I enter into each planet, and by my energy they stay in orbit. I become the moon, and thereby supply the juice of life to all vegetables. I am the fire of digestion in every living body, and I am the air of life, outgoing and incoming, by which I digest the 4 kinds of foodstuffs. So, Krishna is known as Vaishvanara. That's the fire of digestion. Famous verse 15:15. I am seated in everyone's heart, and from me come remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. By all the Vedas am I to be known. Indeed, I am the compiler of Vedanta, and I am the knower of the Vedas. There are 2 classes of beings, the fallible and the infallible. In the material world, every entity is fallible. And in the spiritual world, every entity is called infallible. Besides these two, there is the greatest living personality, the Lord Himself, who has entered into these worlds and is maintaining them. Because I am transcendental, beyond the fallible and the infallible, and because I am the greatest, I am celebrated both in the world and in the Vedas as that supreme person. Whoever knows me as the supreme personality of Godhead without doubting is to be understood as the knower of everything, and he therefore engages himself in full devotional service, O son of Bharat. In the last verse, this is the most confidential part of the Vedic scriptures, O sinless one, and is disclosed now by me. Whoever understands this will become wise, and his or her endeavors will know perfection. So, one particular verse we're going to elaborate on today is verse number 7. Mamaivanso jiva loke jiva bhuta sanatana manak sastan indriyani prakriti stani karshiti. The living entities in this conditioned world, that's us, are my eternal fragmental parts. Due to conditioned life, we are struggling very hard with the 6 senses, which include the mind. This is Srila Prabhupada's purport. It's too long. In this verse, the identity of living being is clearly given. The living entity is the fragmental part and parcel of the Supreme Lord eternally. Eternally. That mention is there. Eternal fragmental parts. Not temporary, eternal. It is not that he assumes individuality in his conditioned life and in his liberated state becomes one with the Supreme Lord. So we're not monists. We're not impersonalists. We are devotees. And we remain eternally the Lord's servants. He is eternally fragmented, separate. It is clearly stated, Sanatan. According to the Vedic version, the Supreme Lord manifests and expands himself in innumerable expansions, of which the primary expansions are called Vishnu Tattva, Krishna, and his incarnations, his expansions and plenary portions. And the secondary expansions are called the living entities, the jivas. That's us. In other words, the Vishnu Tattva is the personal expansion, and the living entities are separated expansions. By his personal expansion, Krishna is manifest in various forms, like Lord Ram, Lord Nrsingadev, Vishnu Murti, and all the predominating deities in the Vaikuntha planets. So they're unlimited material planets, but there are unlimited Vaikuntha planets, and each one of those Vaikuntha planets is ruled by one of Krishna's innumerable expansions. The separated expansions, the living entities, are eternally servitors. The personal expansions of the Supreme Lord of Personality of Godhead, the individual identities of the Godhead, are always present. Well, it's a nice ringtone anyway. Have you heard the one with the cow? The cow just starts mooing. Similarly, the separated expansions of living entities have their identities. As fragmental parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord, the living entities have also fragmental qualities, of which independence is one. Every living entity has an individual soul, his personal individuality, and a minute form of independence. By misuse of that independence, one becomes a conditioned soul. And by proper use of independence, he is always liberated. In either case, he is qualitatively eternal, as the Supreme Lord also is. In his liberated state, he is freed from this material condition, and he is under the engagement of transcendental service unto the Lord. In his conditioned state, he is dominated by the material modes of nature, and he forgets the transcendental loving service of the Lord. As a result, he has to struggle very hard to maintain his existence in the material world. I think we all agree it's difficult at the best of times. The living entities, not only the human beings and the cats and dogs, but even the great controllers of the material world, Brahma, Lord Shiva, and even Vishnu, are all parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord. They are all eternal, not temporary manifestations. The word karshati, struggling or grappling hard, is very significant. The conditioned soul is bound up as though shackled by iron chains. He is bound up by the false ego, and the mind is the chief agent which is driving him in his material existence. When the mind is in the mode of goodness, his activities are good. When the mind is in the mode of passion, his activities are troublesome. And when the mind is the mode of ignorance, he travels in the lower species of life. It is clear, however, in this verse that the conditioned soul is covered by the material body, with the mind and the senses. And when he is liberated, this material covering perishes. But his spiritual body manifests in its individual capacity. So there's some Sanskrit verses here. It is stated here that when a living entity gives up this material embodiment and enters into the spiritual world, he rebodies, and in his spiritual body he can see the Supreme Personality of Godhead face to face. He can hear and speak to him face to face, and he can understand the Supreme Personality as he is. In Smriti also it is understood that in the spiritual planets, everyone lives in bodies featured like the Supreme Personality of God is, eternal, full of knowledge and bliss. As far as bodily construction is concerned, there is no difference between the part and parcel living entities and the expansions of Vishnu Murti. In other words, at liberation, the living entity gets a spiritual body by the grace of the Supreme Personality of God. So there's a little bit more, but we'll stop there. So this particular part of identity, Ashwin was mentioning that Gopeshwar was speaking. He was talking about identities, and he was asking everyone about their cars. I think he was asking, what does your car have? What features does it have? So we may be thinking about our body in that same way, because we identify with the car as my car. And if somebody hits my car, I've been hit. I've been hit. So we identify with this material body as who we are, as our identity. But that's not our identity. It's not our identity. And in the astrological understanding, the sun stands for identity. Uh, and one should have a healthy, strong sense of identity, for it's an important aspect for the growth of the soul. Otherwise, we're unable to see things properly. So, what identity do we have? What identity do we have? We have the identity, Jiver Svarupaya, Krishnara Nityadas, Krishnara Tatasta Shakti, Beta Beta Prakash, that the living entity is eternally the servant of the Supreme Personality of God. So that particular designation, just like service, one may not think that I'm serving. But practically every moment we're serving someone or something. At home, you're serving your spouse. You may be serving your pets. You may be serving your friends and your relatives, your mom and your dad. There's so much service going on, but we don't recognize. And actually, our eternal condition is of service. But the most satisfying service is when we're serving the most wonderful person, the Supreme Personality of God. So that's devotional service. So that understanding, that initial understanding of Vaishnava, of Gaudiya Vaishnava philosophy is called Sambandha. Sambandha is when we understand our real position as Krishna's servants. Now that identity of service gets very, very unique and individual as one advances in spiritual life. But generally, Krishna reveals one's eternal position at the time when one gives up this body. There are verses to that. Of course, for an advanced spiritual person, Krishna may reveal that even beforehand. But generally, that's not something, just like different devotees were asking, well, what was Srila Prabhupada's eternal position? Was he a cowherd boy, or was he a gopi like that? Srila Prabhupada was once asked that question, and he said, that is not your concern. It's not your concern. Well, this is a fact. We should be concerned about our own and not someone else's. But we won't get there at all unless we develop this pure mood of simply being the servant, the unmotivated and uninterrupted, ahaitaki apratiyata, servant of the Supreme Personality of God. So this strong sense of spiritual identity, it's crucial. We have to recognize this fact. We are spiritual beings. We have nothing to do with this material world. And it's easier for some people that are born in more elevated culture and consciousness, they can appreciate very easily, whereas others who are born in a less advanced situation, it may be more troublesome, more difficult. There's a very interesting purport by Buri Jan Prabhu, His Grace, Buri Jan Prabhu, one of the scholars of the ISKCON movement, deep scholars, which means that he's not only understood very clearly Srila Prabhupada's books, but he's also understood the books of our great acharyas, like Rupa Goswami, Jiva Goswami, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, Baladev Bhushana, and others. So there's a wonderful verse in the second canto, the second chapter, Verse 35. And in that verse, it says that you can experience the super soul just by using your intelligence, just by using our and everyone's intelligence. One can experience the super soul. I don't like the way this chair sits because I can't see these guys. And I want to speak to them. Okay. Oh, that's not exactly everything. Anyway, so it mentions that the living entity, when we take this birth in this life, we have a choice. We have a choice to utilize our consciousness for trying to exploit the material world, enjoy physically, mentally, intellectually, geographically, in the terms of political power. Some people are just interested in enough to eat for themselves and their family, and some people want to have it all. They want it all. So according to that mentality, one can be situated in a particular way for exploiting this material world. But the problem is that restricts one's spiritual development. So one can also choose to be spiritually situated. One can choose to be in a position, a culture, a family even, where spiritual realization is available and not just material advancement. So one can choose that. And this verse is saying, the purport that Burjan Prabhu gave, which is a couple of pages. But then it shows us that we made that choice. We all made that choice when we came into this life. What did we want? Beauty, sense enjoyment, money? Or did we want to understand who we are, why we're here, who is God, and what is my relationship with Him? And we see that with different devotees. We're watching Prabhupada Memories. And there are different devotees and how they first came to Krishna consciousness. And some devotees, the first devotee they met was Srila Prabhupada. So that was pretty awesome. And other devotees as well. They were in a situation, and that situation is there because of their spiritual desires from a previous life. Most of us, or many of us, we were simply interested in being nicely situated materially in this material world, and we've had to deal with that. But we can change. We can change that situation by the endeavors and engagement in devotional service. So we have this freedom. It's a little bit free will, just a little bit, not a whole lot. We can choose if we want to be spiritually advanced or if we want to get caught up more in this material world. Early in the 3rd chapter, Krishna explains that, my dear Arjuna, perform your prescribed duties for his satisfaction. And in this way you will remain unattached and free from bondage. So the thing is, by our activities, just like the flies in the spider web, by all of our activities, we're becoming more and more entangled. But by the activities of devotion, we become free. So Prabhupada was saying the living entity is the fragmental part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. The separate expansions of living entities are eternal servitors. And that again brings us those 3 concepts, fundamental concepts of Gaudiya Vaishnavism: Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana. So we should accept our position as the Lord's servants and engage in his service. So, Prabhupada, we were reading again. He says every individual has an individual soul, a personal individuality, and a minute form of independence. And when we misuse that independence, which we've all done, then we become a conditioned soul. So Krishna actually knows. He knows our past, our present, and our future. But he is fully independent. From the very first verse of the Bhagavatam, Janmadi Yasya Yaton Vayad Icharchas Charcheshu Abhigya Sarat. Abhigya means he knows everything, he's fully conscious, and Sarat means he's fully independent. That's God. Some people have the understanding that, well, God, he's a nice person, he's all good, but things have just gotten away from him. The world has kind of gotten away from him. He's good, he's got good intent, but it's gotten away, it's out of control. But that's not God, that's somebody else. God is fully conscious and fully powerful, fully independent. So Krishna explains through the course of the whole Bhagavad Gita how, and he's giving us this education of how to get out of material consciousness and come to the spiritual platform, the spiritual world, our spiritual life. So Bhagavad Gita, it's something that devotees should be reading every day. We were explaining previously when devotee was asked to read the Bhagavad Gita. He replied, well, devotees are always reading Bhagavad Gita. It's not like you have to tell somebody to read this like it's Psychology 101 or something. You have to read the book. But devotees are always reading Bhagavad Gita because every moment, every verse is more and more repeated in the devotee's life. Practically speaking, you can read a chapter a day and get great benefit from it. So that's where we are. We wanted to leave a little time for some questions. Are there any questions anonymously? Right here. There's a question. Okay. Hari Bol. How is the physical body connected to eternity? Is it the spirit or the chakras? Well, the physical body isn't connected to eternity. The spiritual body is. As Prabhupada has mentioned, we have a spiritual entity, we have a spiritual soul, we have our spiritual individuality, and we have spiritual independence. Material, the body, the mind, the ego, the intelligence, those are all material, although they may be subtle. We know the body. We can hit it, touch it, rub it, squeeze it. And the mind is something even more subtle, but it's also material. It's a subtle matter. You have the gross body, and then you have the subtle body. And that subtle body, Krishna explains in the 7th chapter, Bhumir apo nalo vayu kam mano buddhir evacha ahankara iti yame bina prakriti ashtaya. Earth, water, fire, air, ether, those are the gross. Mind, intelligence, and ego, false ego, are my 8 separated material energies. So the mind is also material. It's subtle matter. So much so that mostly we don't acknowledge it. You've lost your mind. You've lost your mind. You have no brain. You lost your mind. Yes, I forgot it somewhere. And practically speaking, we can be thinking outside the box. We can be thinking outside this room right now. We can be thinking what's going on the television, what's going on here or there. So we've lost our minds. We've lost it. We often lose our minds. But the physical body is not connected. The physical body is a temporary manifestation. And it covers, just like clothes. Krishna explains in the second chapter that as a person gives up old clothing and accepts new garments, so a person gives up old material bodies and accepts new ones. So some of us are getting ready to give up these clothes. We all have clothes. We like to keep the clothes as long as possible. You go to my closet and you'll see lots of old clothes. And I like to keep old things. My wife is always continuously trying to throw them out. Because she's not a keeper, she's a thrower. But that's good, to get rid of things that are useless, old and worn out. So that'll happen to this body. No matter what scientists think, that I can replace my brain, I can replace my heart, I can replace my kidney or my liver or my this or my that. Ultimately, this body has its time. It will end. So the Vedic understanding is that we have to prepare for that life, the next one. Even we're trying to prepare in this life for more enjoyments. But the fact is, in the Vedic understanding, everything we're getting in this life is the result of what we did in our life before. We want to change everything and make it better, but it's not going to happen. So the next, Anishtam, Ishtam, Mishram Cha, Trivida, Karmanapalam. Anishtam means good, Ishtam means bad, and Mishram means a mixture. All of those things, they accrue after death. We're thinking whatever we're doing now is setting us up. No, it's not. This is already set. This lifetime is set. We're only performing activities for our next lifetime. And some people don't even think, what is the result? What will be the consequence? I can do whatever I want, and I'll get away with it. You pay. You pay when you go out. You go down to the Pick and Pay. You can fill up your trolley. But when you go out, you got to pay. So similarly, we have so many activities we perform, and we have to pay on the way out. So the physical body is not connected to eternity. It is the spirit. The chakras are just subtle aspects of the material body. Two, how do we try to be humble and not let our false ego take over? Well, Krishna has a very good way of dealing with that. It's called the association of devotees. Association of devotees. So we're always put in a situation to test our tolerance and our humility. His Holiness Bhakti Charu Swami was once serving Srila Prabhupada with, of course, Srila Prabhupada was surrounded by his most senior and advanced and effective devotees. And this one devotee gave His Holiness Bhakti Charu Swami a lashing with words. He really, and this devotee was kind of famous for that, for chastising Maharaj. And Srila Prabhupada saw Bhakti Maharaj when he left that situation. And immediately Prabhupada could understand what had happened. And he mentioned to Bhakti Maharaj that one's spiritual advancement is shown not by how high your chair is, but by how much you can put up with, how much you can tolerate. Titikshasa Karunika Surida Saridina Ajata Shatravakshanta Sarva Sarubhushana. Tiksha means toleration. And in the second chapter, Matra Sparshas Dukanteya Sitoshna Sukadukada Agama Paino Nityas Tams Tikshasva Bharata. So, and Krishna is saying that one must learn. We're thinking, well, I'll think about it maybe later. No, Krishna is saying one must learn to tolerate the difficulties of this material world. The non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress, and their disappearance in due course are like the appearance and disappearance of winter and summer seasons. Boy, we've had a cold one this year. They arise from sense perception, O sky of Bharata, and one must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed. So we have to be tolerant. And it's difficult to recognize our minds and our egos, but this is how the association of devotees purifies that. Because in the association of devotees, interesting things happen. Very interesting things. And that's Krishna's direction for neutralizing this false ego. We have an ego. We have a real ego. We're Krishna's eternal servants. What particular aspect that may be, I was remembering years ago, I was in Vrindavan. And I had been serving on Sankirtan for years, going out and traveling in a van, a cold, ice cold van, so much so that when you woke up in the morning and you started the engine and chanted your rounds, it started raining in the truck because your breath would freeze on the ceiling, the steel ceiling of this panel van. So I did that for a number of years, and we were in Vrindavan at one time, and I was thinking, I'm like Nanda Maharaj's oxen. I mean, I'm not very intelligent, but I just pulled the load. So we don't know what we will be in the spiritual world, but we just want to be one of Krishna's servants. There's a famous story in the Krishna book, in the 10th canto, where Lord Brahma, the top guy in the universe, he's praying to be what? In the spiritual world, he's praying to be a blade of grass that Krishna's loving associates, the gopis, put their feet on. And he's the most elevated personality in the entire creation. And that's what he's praying for. Just to be touched by the feet of the gopis. There's another nice story of Kaliya. Kaliya was a big snake with lots of hoods and lots of fangs. And he poisoned one part of the Jamuna River, and when the cows and cowherd boys, after a long day, herding the cows and playing in the forest, went to drink the water, they died. They died of the snake's poison. So Krishna, he jumped right in, and he made a lot of racket so that Kaliya could come there. And Kaliya grabbed Krishna in his coils and was trying to crush Krishna and bite Krishna. What Krishna did, Krishna sneaked out of the coils and he jumped up on Kaliya's heads. And what did Krishna do? He started dancing. Now, to Kaliya, it was like kicking. Maybe you've seen some of the, what is it, Kathak? The one where they stomp So Krishna was dancing, stomping on Kaliya's heads. And Kaliya was trying to bite Krishna, but he couldn't do it. And in the meantime, Krishna is kicking the daylights out of Kaliya. So much so that Kaliya is starting to vomit fire and poison, and then his own blood. And luckily for Kaliya, interestingly enough, his wives were devotees of Krishna. So they prayed to Krishna, and Krishna received their prayers. And eventually, even Kaliya himself realized through the college of hard kicks that Krishna is actually somebody special. Krishna is God. So sometimes we may feel like that. We're getting kicked. Somebody is dancing on my head. Prabhu is dancing on my head, the temple president or the temple commander, or even somebody who's not a temple president or a temple commander. They may be dancing on my head. So we have to see that Krishna wants us to learn something. Every situation for a devotee, every situation ultimately is Krishna. When we take initiation, when we offer ourselves to the service of the Guru Parampara, the Sampradaya, to Srila Prabhupada, we're not being controlled by this material nature, by Maya, or the three modes. We're being controlled by Krishna. It may look like Maya. You're in Maya, Prabhu. Give me a break. But it's actually Krishna. Krishna wants us to learn something. And sometimes when Krishna's got our number, he really just doesn't let go till we learn. The lesson keeps coming around. It keeps on coming around till we get it. And in that way, Krishna is teaching. He's trying to help us understand. So, humility, tolerance can never have too much. It can never have too much. What is the best way to serve Krishna? Any way is the best way, but the beginning is to chant Krishna's name. That is the most effective way in this age. Harinama, Harinama, Hariname Kevalam, Kalo Nasteva, 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 Katir Anyata. There's no other way. In this age, there's no other way. Nastyeva, Nastyeva. There's no other way for achieving self-realization except chanting the holy names of Krishna. So when we do that chanting, then everything else opens up. Everything else. Krishna's name, Krishna gives his form, his activities, his pastimes, his entourage. All of these things develop when we sincerely chant Hare Krishna. So I hope that's okay. Thank you very much. So now we have the opportunity to chant Krishna's names for Krishna's pleasure, ultimately, and for our own spiritual development. So we thank you very much for coming, and we hope you'll continue to come for all the programs for Purushottam Adhika Mas, because so much spiritual benefit is there. We don't think. So many people don't even think they need to do this. They do everything else, but don't realize the most important thing is to become spiritually awakened. Haven't got a clue that this is the most important thing that someone should be doing in this life. And it's so unfortunate. So therefore, Srila Prabhupada wanted us to go out and distribute Krishna consciousness, distribute Bhagavad Gita, distribute the holy name. We're going to have the opportunity next weekend, around 10 o'clock if you'd like to come. We're going to chant up and down the street. If you've never done that, it's very interesting. We're going to go to Randavash here, not very far. We'll just go up and down once or twice and chant Hare Krishna. and purify the world, purify the atmosphere, and give people an opportunity just to hear it. Just hearing Hare Krishna is so beneficial. If you do that long enough, you'll go back home, back to God. It's just a matter of how many times. If we're still here, we haven't chanted enough. If we keep chanting, we'll get there. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki, Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is ki, Sri Sinatai, Mahavira Chandra ki, Tai Gaur. So now we'll have Guru Puja. We'll offer some worship to Srila Prabhupada, who brought all this information along.